Yes, it's official. Francis Ngannou is no longer with the UFC. The news of his departure came as a shock to the MMA community. After all, he's the reigning heavyweight champion in the UFC. Well, he was. UFC President Dana White announced the news in a press conference after much speculation online. So let's take a look into the reasons behind his shocking exit and what Dana White had to say about it. Starting off, Francis Ngannou makes a shocking exit from the UFC. Last week, there was a rumor going around that Cyril Gane and John Jones would be facing each other off at UFC 285 on March 5th for the vacant heavyweight title. Obviously, it raises questions regarding the status of Francis Ngannou in the league, who's the current UFC heavyweight champion, and Dana White had to step forward and clear those things up at the press conference following UFC Vegas 67. He confirmed that they're releasing the star from his contract. He claimed that the administration offered a lucrative deal to Ngannou that'd make him the highest paid heavyweight champion of all time, but he turned that down. Now, that's a completely strange thing for someone to do. Why would Ngannou turn down such an amazing deal that'd offer him more than any UFC heavyweight ever? Let's hear it from the man himself. For now, we only have his words from past interviews regarding UFC contracts to go by. Apparently, this powerhouse has a lot to say about the unfair structure of his last deal with the league over the past few years. If you've been keeping up with him, you'd know that he always wanted to box, and that's one of the biggest and most obvious reasons behind his retiring from UFC. Up next, his passion for boxing influenced his decision to leave. During an interview with TMZ Sport back in January 2022, he said that boxing is something that he just can't take his eyes off. He further added that he's going to make his dream come true either way, even if he stays with the league or decides to end his contract. So he had been negotiating with Dana White to add this clause to his new contract because he didn't want to retire without having a boxing match. In fact, there had been a whole lot of discourse for a hot minute that he was going to box Tyson Fury. Things got interesting when Fury invited him into the ring to hint at a potential fight following his win over Dillian Whyte in April 2022. Well, we didn't hear from them afterward. Now, it's unclear whether it was due to Tyson Fury losing interest in their fight or the UFC administration threatening to sue these men for serious interference. Even if Tyson's no longer a possibility, there's always Deontay Wilder because he's more of a brawler and may be viewed as a more realistic opponent for the heavy-handed but inexperienced Ngannou. The good thing is that both of these men have expressed their interest in fighting each other. Moving on, Ngannou's boxing matches could pull in massive revenue. The highest paid heavyweight champion in UFC history was Brock Lesnar, who earned a huge paycheck of $2.5 million plus an undisclosed amount of pay-per-view against his UFC 200 fight against Mark Hunt. It's estimated that he ended up getting $7 million for that event, which brought in $71 million from 1.2 million PPV purchases. Now compare that to Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder, who each received a guaranteed purse of $5 million plus a percentage of the pay-per-view profits for their second fight. That event generated approximately $64 million in PPV sales from 800,000 buys. In the end, both men walked away with $25 million each from the fight. With the UFC, fighters are earning a much lower guaranteed purse and even a much smaller share of the pay-per-view pie. Mostly it's just $2 or $3 per PPV above a couple 100,000 purchases. But the majority of the pay-per-view earnings in boxing goes to the main attraction. Now, even if he's earning the most of any UFC champion right now, Ngannou can still stand to make twice that amount from a single boxing fight. Another thing to consider here is that a fighter almost never gets the PPV share in the UFC unless he turns out victorious in a fight. It's pretty uncommon that it works any other way, and if Francis were to lose, then he returns to his base show and wins money. And given the fact that Stipe Miocic has the longest heavyweight title reign in the history of UFC with 3 consecutive defenses, he must consider what the deal is worth in the long run under realistic conditions. Coming up, Ngannou had several issues with the UFC. It looks like he had been trying to get out of the contract over the past few years. He was extremely unhappy with the level of inactivity that was being forced upon him by the administration over the recent year. It's surprising that he only fought once a year in 2020 and 2021, despite being physically fit and eager to fight. He even expressed his frustration on social media in 2020, writing that he only had 2 title fights in the heavyweight division in the last 2 years, and he still doesn't know when the next one will be. He also added that he only fought for 20 seconds during the last 16 months. Actually, he believed that the UFC refused to give him fights because he declined to sign a new multi-fight contract with them. Last but not the least, his refusal to sign a new contract had been the main issue. In late October 2021, Ngannou stated that his unwillingness to sign a new deal had been causing all the trouble. The thing is that he didn't want to get himself into a new deal on certain terms. He didn't really feel protected by those terms. As he was offered only 2 fights in 2 years, he had to borrow money from his friends to live. You can tell that wouldn't be the ideal scenario for anyone. So based on that horrible experience, he wanted to sign a new contract that would offer him something better in terms of protection and the pay he deserved. He also revealed that the treatment he received from UFC officials was another factor. Before scheduling an interim heavyweight title fight between Derek Lewis and Cyril Gane, the promotion implied that he was unwilling to fight, when in fact he was in Cameroon awaiting a visa renewal. That's one of the several stories shared by the champion that'd make anyone think twice before signing another one-sided contract with the UFC. We're sure that Francis Ngannou will issue his own statement about his current situation and what he's planning next, but for the time being, that's what happened between the UFC and the former heavyweight champion that brought them to this point. Now, Dana White says that Francis Ngannou didn't want to take the risk with a new UFC contract. First off, Dana White breaks his silence on Ngannou's exit. The rumors of Francis leaving the UFC started a huge debate in the MMA community. The UFC president, Dana White, had to come out of his hiding after his controversial moment in Vegas where he slapped his wife to clear things up. According to him, the organization was unable to reach an agreement with Ngannou for a new deal after he fought out his previous one with a win over Cyril Gane at UFC 270. Yes, that makes him a free agent now, with the UFC taking off all the rights to match any other offers. That means that the former heavyweight champion is now free to join any other organization. White talked about the situation, saying that Ngannou is in a place right now where he doesn't want to take many risks. He believes that he's in a good place to fight fewer opponents and earn more money, so the organization is just going to let him do it. So they've released him from his contract and taken up the right to match, allowing him to go wherever he wants and do whatever he wants. He further discussed how the UFC had been in talks with him about a new contract for most of the past 2 years, but both parties were unable to reach an agreement on contract terms. Moving on, Francis wanted a new deal with certain terms. The Predator had previously said that he'd be only willing to get into a new deal with the UFC only if it allows him the freedom to pursue outside interests, including a possible future in boxing, after teasing a fight against heavyweight champion Tyson Fury. White said that they tried to get him on board with a possible fight with Joe Jones, but even an opponent like Jones wasn't enough to compel him to stay. He also expressed that they did everything in their power to make his fight with Joe happen, but he's convinced that there are bigger opportunities for him outside of the UFC with lesser opponents. Last but not least, he's one of the 2 fighters they couldn't come to a deal with. White also talked about how Ngannou is now one of the only 2 times during his UFC career when he did everything possible to sign a deal with an athlete and still failed to do so. The first fighter they couldn't reach an agreement with was Fedor Emelianenko. The organization tried everything to persuade him to accept the deal. In fact, the UFC executive vice president, Hunter Campbell, accompanied him to 350 dinners. Still, nothing worked out between them. He then took an unexpected turn, saying that Francis doesn't want to take the risk of fighting with Joe Jones because he's the best of all time. He has no issues with his exit because they would never allow his expected term in the UFC. Dana added that there are plenty of other organizations for him to do so and possibly end up with one of them. He'll end up going somewhere where someone will throw money at him and he'll fight fights he believes he can win. And that's a wrap for the video. What do you think will be Ngannou's next move? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more amazing and exciting videos like this. See you at the next one.